Did you hit the button?
I mean, you should always just assume anytime you sit down that the button has already been pressed. For all you know, I've been recording for an hour.
That would be impressive.
One thing that I want to bring up to our listeners is that before you came over here, you said, let me change into my podcasting clothes and then I will come over. And I've been very curious to see what that was going to be. And you're wearing a shirt that says, it'll be better next time. So I'm guessing people should just like stop listening to this episode. Just skip over this one, listen to the next episode, because you're setting the expectation that the next podcast is going to be better than this one.
You're not saying that this one's bad. It's just going to be better next time.
Just this constant iterative improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You can see my shirt because I just took my jacket off. It is bitterly cold outside.
It is.
Like unbelievably cold.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the coldest it's ever been.
Yeah. What's the, let's just check real quick and see what's the temperature right now. 50 degrees. Yep. Coldest it's ever been. Coldest it ever will be.
I have and on a 50 F2C, that's 10 degrees Celsius.
Yep, 10 Celsius.
I've never felt colder weather.
Never in your life.
Horrible.
It is rainy. The rain subtracts 10 degrees, right?
Anyways, but I had to shed my jacket because I always get real hot during podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video.
It's marathon week.
It is marathon week.
I'm running the Austin Marathon in Sunday. 5 days.
I'm glad you finally figured that out. It is 5 days.
Oh, man. Whoo, boy.
Hopefully your running skills are more up to par than your mental math skills.
I have never done this before. Not mental math.
I've never had to count from Tuesday to Sunday before.
They say that half the distance of the marathon is the first 20 miles. And the second half is the last 6 miles.
Oh, interesting.
And I've never run those final 6 miles.
Yeah, but you're going to have all the people cheering and stuff. That's going to help for sure.
I did run the course, and there's this hill. And that hill is almost vertical.
Yeah.
And it's at mile like 25 and a half.
You have said that this is the Austin Marathon. So isn't that hill by the Capitol building or something?
Yeah, it's on like 11th and Rainy or something.
Yeah. So I mean, you're gonna have this cool view when you get up there. You can see the Capitol building. Straight up. Yep. You get
perfectly
there's
vertical.
There's a rock climbing section of this marathon.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
They expect you to run up a rock wall.
Yeah, that's gonna be rough. At that time, in the marathon.
When I was going into this, I gave myself permission to walk.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously don't want to, but I'm walking up that hill. I just already know it.
Just gonna start plotting.
Like there's no way. I'm gonna turn the corner and be like, well, there it is.
Yep, that's the hill. Time to walk.
Anyway, what's on the list here today, Daniel?
Well, we've got a lot of different things today, but I wanted to give an update on the S9. So
you say that, but it's all very themed.
You think so?
Yes, well, I have a theme.
We'll see. At the end of this episode, people can decide if they think that this had a theme.
You don't think I theme these shows?
Sometimes I wonder when I'm trying to name them. Sometimes I wonder.
You're just really hunting for that through thread.
Yes. Anyway, the S9. So when last we talked about it,
actually, just one more thing.
Oh my God.
Have you considered feeding the audio through like Whisper something to get a transcript and then just asking AI to name the episodes?
Oh, interesting idea. It would probably be terrible. Remember when you tried using ChatGPT to generate descriptions? That was bad.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I don't think AI is there yet.
So the S9.
Yeah, so the S9. So we had talked about this wild experience I had of getting, these free lenses. And one of the things we said in that episode was that I had gotten on their website and it looked like I might also get another free lens. And it turns out I did. So Panasonic did send me a coupon code for a free 51.8 L mount lens.
I just can't believe it.
Yeah. So I redeemed that coupon and got it shipped. The shipping FedEx 2-day was free, and it'll be here tomorrow. So I'm going to have 3 free lenses with my Lumix S9.
I was listening back to our episode last week on camcorders, and we got a little too stuck on the expensive ones and didn't talk enough about cheap camcorders.
Yeah, I did kind of feel that way too.
And my whole point of that episode was to talk about cheap camcorders, and we totally missed the mark. But one of the things we were talking about was like, oh, if you have this $3,000 camcorder deal, what could you comparatively get as far as mirrorless? We did not mention that you could get an S9 and what'd you get, half a dozen lenses for $1,500.
Yeah. So like at this point, I think we're going to talk at some point in this episode about other lens options. In fact, maybe that's now.
It's literally next.
I did buy the Sigma 45 f2.8 for that camera. So my total, outlay for this camera system so far is $2,050, not counting tax. And I have 4 lenses, 4 full frame lenses and a camera.
That's unbelievable. The list price for that camera is like $1,700.
Yeah. It's just a ridiculous deal. And it's funny to me that I've ended up in the situation where, like before a few weekends ago, I was like, well, whatever happens to me happens with camera systems. And something happened to me. And now I'm really interested to see what Panasonic comes out with, because I've got all these L mount lenses. Like if a new good Panasonic camera came out, I could buy the camera and already be, set with at least like a starter set of lenses. Like it's a pretty good deal.
Mm-hmm. Like a Lucas starter. Yeah. I am flabbergasted, as they say.
Do they say that?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's part of me that's like, I wish I had also experienced it. When I was there with you, I could have also bought an S9. Yeah. I don't need an S9 in any way.
It doesn't really fit your camera lifestyle.
I already have an XT5 and XT6. I don't need an S9. I have no use for it. But also, I'm like, I could have had an S9 and 4 lenses. What a deal.
Yep.
Anyway, so instead I've been just looking at L mount lenses and really thinking about what would be the perfect lens for you.
Okay.
And
what'd you come up with?
I just have a bunch of tabs here open, and I can't even remember the ones that I looked up, but I did open in new tab all the ones that I thought, this might be perfect for Daniel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear these tabs with you right now and maybe just go through the list.
Okay. Sounds good.
The first thing I have here is a search that says Summicron 35mm M versus L, because the Summicron 35mm M lens for Leica is, I think there's a Leica lens designer who's like, this is the sharpest lens we've ever made. And I was curious if it was the same design as the L mount. The L mount is way, way bigger, so I don't think it's the same design. So maybe that one is not the lens for you. Skipping over this search page, which is just lenses on B&H sorted by L mount. Okay, the next one here is the Leica Super APO Summicron SL 21mm f2 ASPH L mount lens.
I don't think that I should have realized this, but I don't think it had occurred to me that those APO lenses were available on L mount. Because we had talked about it a while back with the Q3 43mm and the APO lens being like this, super powered Leica lens. It's, has no distortion, like super clear and all that. And I guess it didn't occur to me that you can actually buy those for interchangeable lens cameras.
Do you know why the APO matters?
We talked about it, and I can't quite remember what the...
It is apochromatic.
That's right.
They are supposedly perfectly converging the light at the back of the lens, and you will not get any chromatic aberration.
Yeah. But what's that going to cost you?
$5,495.
Do you have that lens pulled up? I'm curious how much it weighs.
Oh, it's enormous.
Yeah, all those lenses are huge.
Normally, you're okay. I'm looking at f1.4 version of a lens, or an f1.8, and then like an f2 version, like 1.4 and a 2 maybe. And the 2s are way smaller, lighter, more compact. And then the faster ones are the bigger, heavier, more premium. In this case, for Leica, their f2 versions are generally their APO ones because they have to be a little slower, and they are a freaking enormous. Let me click over here to the specs. This thing is 1.7 pounds or 789 grams.
Do you, in your list, because so first off, Is anything in your list under $5,000?
Yes, Daniel.
Okay.
Yes, this is just the first thing in my list.
Do you have the 50 millimeter version of that lens in your list?
I don't remember.
There's a 50 millimeter
Yes,
f2 APO lens.
Okay, I was really on the fence about whether or not you needed the 21, the 35, or the 50 millimeter f2 APO Summicron.
So the reason I was bringing this up is because, and I haven't substantiated
because
this.
You were going to get that for free too?
Yeah, probably. So funny that you say.
Why is it funny, Daniel?
I haven't substantiated this. This is just something I saw somebody say on the internet, which is, super trustworthy. But somebody said that the optical formula that was used in the Panasonic 51.8 is pretty similar to what's in that 50 f2. And so they're like, just take the 51.8 and stop it down to f2, and it's basically the same lens.
You shut your mouth. No, I will not accept that premise. That is ridiculous.
Yep. The 50 isn't even the expensive Panasonic lens. They have a 51.4 that's a Lumix S Pro. But apparently the 51.8 is like, it comes from some like, core formula that matches that.
I'm sure they're good lenses. But I mean, these Summicron lenses have something like 5 aspherical elements or whatever. It's a lot of glass.
I'm sure
it's huge.
I'm sure those lenses are fantastic, but as cool as I think the S9 is, if you're buying a $5,000 lens, I don't think you should be putting it on that sensor.
I don't know.
I feel like you could probably find something better.
I mean, like a 63 megapixel Leica sensor.
Yeah.
Which is just a Sony sensor. Anyways, Summicron means it's f2 or greater. I've been meaning to say that. Okay, the next one here is there's a lot of Leicas apparently at the front of this list. I don't even know how long this list is, Daniel. Go ahead and cancel all the topics.
It's going to be Lucas's tour of expensive lenses.
Lucas reading L-mount lenses off the internet.
Yeah.
Episode 123. Leica Vario L Maret. I don't know what the Vario or the L Maret means for Leica. This is also an SL because it's a mirrorless lens that goes on the SL camera, which is L-mount, 24-90.
I saw this lens earlier today. I think Vario probably stands for zoom, because it's a zoom lens.
Makes sense.
So is that at $4,000?
$5,895.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember. I did see that lens.
Variable aperture, f2.8 to f4. This is probably going to give you very similar image quality to the Kit 18-55 Fuji lens.
Yeah, I'm sure that $5,000 Leica lens does
very
that.
Similar.
It's kind of like a 24-105,
almost,
but with a faster aperture and a little bit less. Reach.
I thought this was very interesting because normally it's 24-105 or 24-70, and then it's constant aperture.
Yeah,
I have not seen this lens before.
Yeah,
I am not aware of a 24-90, 2.8 to f4 variable aperture lens for any other system.
I thought it was an interesting range too.
Yeah, you can get it used for $4,656. So that one's on my list. This one seems pretty sweet. Okay, next one here is as you're probably already expecting, the Sigma 28-105 f2.8. I think for $1,500, this could be your go-to lens for whatever future L-mount camera you get.
I think that's the key. I think that actually is a pretty compelling option for whatever future L-mount camera I get. I don't think it's a good option for the S9.
You have a 20-60, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got 20 on the wide end. It's kind of a gross aperture.
I honestly don't feel like I use even on something like the 17-70, which is 24 on the wide end. I don't feel like I shoot it wide open. That's confusing. I don't feel like I shoot it on the wide end all that often. And
it's closer to 25 and a half. I mean,
yeah.
Pretty similar to this. I think this is the perfect lens for you.
It's a pretty good lens.
Later. It's not for your S9. Next one here is the Panasonic Lumix S Pro 16-35 f4.
That one's going to cost a bit.
Yeah, it's $1,000.
Not as bad as I thought.
Not too expensive.
Not really the focal range that I go for, though.
Seems fairly compact. And it's a 16-35. I felt like that was a good range. F4 is probably fine on full frame. I mean, I'd expect it to be reasonably sharp.
That feels like that's the vlog lens.
I mean, it's an S Pro, so it's F4, but I would expect this to be sharp, and you're getting a fairly small lens. I mean, sure, it's 500 grams, which is like 1 pound. Not like super tiny. Probably gonna be a little heavy on your S9.
But it's pro lens.
But it's 4.25 inches, so it's maybe not too much shorter than that 20-60.
Yeah.
Yep, so I like that one. I probably should have left these tabs open just in case you needed the links. Well.
Too
Guess
late now.
I guess those aren't going to be
I guess that's my problem later, isn't it?
I suppose those won't be in the show notes. Just Google them. I don't know.
Just ask Chat GPT or whatever you kids are doing these days.
Just feed it in there and say, give me some show notes for this. Daniel don't got time for that.
Never do that.
Okay, well, since you don't want that one, you're probably not going to want this one, which is the Sigma 14 to 24 2.8 DN art lens.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this when we did the tier list. I understand why those are useful lenses for some things, but they're just not useful for me.
So I think you go with the f4 version, but if you need the 2.8, this one exists. It's more expensive. It's $1,400. But it's for Leica L, so you may have compatibility issues. Okay, so close that one too. All right, this next one here is I don't know why I picked a bunch of wide lenses for you, Daniel. I think it's because it's a carry-around camera, and for me, I would want it to be wider. Mm-hmm. And also, you probably need some wide lenses like the Sigma 17mm f4 DGDN Contemporary.
That's pretty wide, 17 full frame.
Yep. But
you don't have anything that wide?
No, sure don't. It's $600.
Surprisingly reasonable.
Yeah. I like this one as an option. It would pair well with your 45. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I have here for $2,395, which in my opinion is a steal, the Leica Summicron SL 35mm f2 ASPH.
I mean, $2,300 is at least like I can fathom a world where I spend that much on a lens. Probably not that lens, but
this lens,
I can imagine it.
This lens would be incredible.
It's probably heavy. I feel like all those Leica lenses are heavy.
No. This one's absolutely reasonable because it's a 35mm. It's a 67mm filter thread. It only weighs 400 grams, less than a pound.
I do miss
It's 3.3 inches long.
One thing I miss about Micro Four Thirds is that the cheap, there's always like a cheap and an expensive version of the lenses, and Leica branded some of the expensive ones. Or it was some type of like Panasonic Leica collaboration or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was just so nice that like with the 42.5, which was a fantastic lens on Micro Four Thirds, I think the cheap one was like $400 and the expensive one was like $1,000. And I missed the days whenever it was that approachable.
Yeah, this one's not that. But I think for $2,400, I mean, we're in 70 to 200 territory. If we're talking maybe like Canon glass, but this is Leica glass. And this is a 35. It's not an APO. Okay. That's why it's not huge.
That's why it's not $5,000.
And it's not the fast one. It's the Summicron, not the Summa Lux. Sure. So you're not living in Lux style, but I think this is the perfect lens for you. Yeah. This one here says, let's stay in touch, register here. So gotta go ahead and register for that one.
Yeah. Make sure you sign up somebody's email for that.
All right. This one is the Sigma 24mm f3.5.
That one doesn't sound as appealing to me.
It's $550, and it's fairly small.
F3.5. It's got the small size has to be the appeal.
Yeah, super tiny. I think this one would be a very nice, just walk around street photography type lens.
Do you think that is it shorter than the 45 I got?
It is 1.9 inches long, so probably right about the same.
Yeah, it's around the same.
Like 200 grams, so little guy.
Pretty cool.
Okay, and then this one is about Papa Michael, so we're going to go ahead and close that puppy. I think this may be it. Nope. The 18 to 40 f4.5 to f6.3.
Yeah.
This is a kit lens option for this.
That's a lens that I looked at. I considered getting that instead of the Sigma because it's very small and light. I think it's shorter than the Sigma and it weighs like 10 ounces. It's super lightweight.
If you buy the S9 with this as the kit lens instead of the 20 to 60, it costs $100 more or $200 more. I think it goes from $1,500 to $1,700 on like their deal price.
I think that 18 to 40 came out after the camera.
It did.
And when it came out, people kind of said, this feels like the lens that the S9 needed.
It's the lens that it should have launched with, not that 26mm f8.
I looked at a couple of reviews of it, and it seemed like, it's hard to tell. Like, people felt like it was generally good-ish, but it's not a fantastic performing zoom lens. and is obviously not going to compare to a prime in terms of image quality. So I think what it has going for it is how small it is.
I mean, it's 1.6 inches long.
Yeah.
It is shorter than any of the lenses you have thus far.
I still haven't ruled out getting it just to have as like, I want to have the smallest possible carry around setup. Like that feels like that might be it. The 20-60, I was going to say, which is, the other kit lens option and the kit lens that I have, is apparently a really good lens. I haven't used it that much yet. It's not small. It's about the same size as the 85 and the 50. But people online really seem to like it. And a lot of people were saying if they could only have one L-mount lens, it would just be that. And that sounds like maybe an exaggeration, but
this
it sounds
18
like it's
to 40?
No, the 20-60.
Oh, 2060.
So the 20-60 seems like it's a pretty good lens. I think the 18 to 40 maybe like optically isn't quite as good.
Okay. I mean, it's like a nice small lens if you're trying to find something small for that camera.
So. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's on my list. I mean, I assume you're just going to buy all of these. Okay.
Yeah,
I think I found the lens that you were talking about earlier, which is not the APO lens. It is just the Summicron 50mm f2.
Okay.
Not APO.
Probably is. Yeah.
This one's $21.95.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think you're right. I think that is the one that I had heard was similar to the 51.8.
I will allow it. Yeah. You don't have to buy this lens because you already have the 51.8. Okay. Oh, then there's the non-Summicron version of the 35, which obviously you're going to buy the Summicron version. Oh, and there's the Thermo Summicron. Yep, I think that's all of them. Yep, those are all the lenses that you need.
A lot of lenses, and if I was to fully switch over to L-mount, I would have to get a 70-200. So
these are just for your S9.
Yeah, all of that is just for my S9.
Yeah, those are just S9 lenses.
Living large over here.
Especially with all those APO Summicron lenses you bought. Wow, Daniel. Yeah.
Be walking around with my Peak Design backpack worth more than my house.
Yep. Okay, all right. Let's get into an actual topic here. Oh, I should probably start my timer.
Yep. Episode starts now.
Here we go. Just go ahead and just delete the rest of that.
Yeah. All of that was a post pre-show.
That's not a segment. Anyway, you wanted to talk about teleconverters.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to talk about teleconverters is because that's something that I always heard about and saw when I was looking at lenses. And I was always really skeptical of them because it's just like, here's this little thing that costs, maybe a couple $100 and it magically multiplies your focal length by, 1.4 to whatever. Like it makes your lens longer. And, it always seemed like some weird, like, I don't know. I don't want to say like a hack, but I guess just like a ripoff almost, where it technically gives you the spec that you're expecting, but would have so many trade-offs and you're putting more glass in the image path. And I was just always really skeptical of teleconverters.
And they're not cheap, especially a 2x teleconverter costs basically as much as a lens.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're not cheap, but if you think about it, it's a lot cheaper than a lens of that focal length would be.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where it felt like it was in a weird spot where it's too expensive to buy just for fun to try out, but cheap enough that I was suspicious of them. But now we've had the chance to use a couple of different ones because you bought one for, and I mean, this was a while back, 6 months ago or something. You bought one for Fuji X mount. And then more recently, I bought a Canon EF one to use on one of our broadcast cameras. And we're using that one with the 70-200. So I felt like we've had a couple of experiences now where we've seen them in use, and I was just curious to see like what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so I guess I have three things here. One is this segment so that you can roast me about how I still haven't looked to see if I have a Canon teleconverter lying around my house?
No,
okay.
I had forgotten that.
Yep. Number two is it was actually November 2023 that I bought the teleconverter.
Oh my gosh, time flies. It was a year and 4 months or something. 3 months.
Yeah, so wow. I definitely got a lot of use on that. One of which, besides shooting the Eclipse, was taking so I have obviously a Canon AE1, as everyone knows. But the lenses that I have for that camera are a 50-1.8, a 28 2.8, and a zoom of some unknown range that is telephoto in nature. And that zoom has a teleconverter.
Oh.
And yes, I have mounted that lens to a teleconverter to an adapter to my Fuji teleconverter to see if I could get it to focus. Very hard.
Turns out you can teleconvert too much.
It's like doing bad fractions. Anyway, I think that teleconverters are the bee's knees, but generally you will suffer image quality.
Well, and you do lose either one or two stops depending on, because usually these brands seem to have like two models. I know on the Canon it was like a 1.4x and a 2x.
Yeah,
that's the focal length multiplication, and it's like the lower one, the 1.4 in the Canon case, you lose one stop, and the 2x you lose two stops. So like that's the other trade-off.
2 stops?
Something like that. I'll look it up.
Is that how the math works? Hold on, let me think.
I think it might be.
If I'm at 2.8 and I put on a 2x teleconverter, I'm at 5.6. One stop is to 4, 2 stops is to 5.6. Yeah, no, that checks out. Math checks out. It's 2 stops worse.
Yep.
Which, if you need that much range, ideally you're outside, so probably not an issue.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's plenty of cases where it's not a big deal. Like for the broadcast situation, I bought the 1.4x mostly because I didn't actually think we needed the 2x reach.
Sure.
And I thought maybe the image quality would be worse with the 2x. I wasn't sure, but the other thing is that lens that we're using is an f2.8 lens. We normally were running those cameras at like f3.6, 3.7, something like that, because you know, if you're trying to focus on stuff like on action that's happening, you don't want your depth of field to be too shallow. So we were already kind of running them like close to f4, and that one stop teleconverter makes the minimum f4. But we're filming a stage; it's very well lit. Light is never a problem. Mm-hmm. So that's a situation where like losing the stop didn't matter at all. And like you said, a lot of times maybe the other use case would be filming like a sporting event or doing birding or something. And so, you know, again, the light doesn't really matter that much. So something that I thought was like a major shortcoming to these things probably isn't really that big of a deal most of the time.
Often the other thing that you might use them for is macro photography. You can, I don't know if it increases your magnification, but it does increase your range.
Sure.
I should probably check on that. I don't really. Does it make it so it's 2-to-1 instead of 1-to-1?
I don't know.
That'd be interesting to know.
Yeah.
We kind of zooming it in. Maybe it does. Anyway, frequently used for macro photography. I have attached my 2x teleconverter to my 80 macro to get it to be a 160 millimeter 5.6 prime, and that is just ridiculous.
So you have the Fuji teleconverter and it's 1.6x?
No, it's the 2x. I have the 2x.
You have the 2x.
I have the 2x teleconverter.
The big boy.
Yeah.
And I guess you kind of hit on something too, which is that not every lens supports the teleconverter.
No, it has to insert a part of the teleconverter itself kind of into the back of the lens. And so generally you have limited compatibility and often not third-party compatibility unless they're specifically trying to match it.
Yeah. So like, it's usually going to be compatible with the telephoto. Like the 70 to 200 will typically be compatible. Maybe something like a 100 to 400, like that sort of lens.
Yeah.
And then in the case of the Fuji, the 80 millimeter macro also supports it.
Yeah, that's frequently common that the macro will support it.
Okay.
Usually for manufacturers, most lenses will take the teleconverter. It's where it gets weird is when you have super zooms that go too wide where it doesn't make sense.
But I don't think, like on Fuji, I think it's pretty limited. I don't think you can use it with the 16 to 55, for example.
No. That's not it's not a telephoto enough.
Yeah.
You'd have to be looking at anything that's essentially beyond the 80 macro prime. It's anything that's over the 50 to 140 when you're looking at like there are new 150 to 500 or the 200 millimeter f2, things like that will take the teleconverter. But as far as use and image quality, I've gotten good images out of it, but I do see an obvious reduction in sharpness. You know, you're shooting at 5.6, and so you'd expect, I'm like stopped down, I'll have maybe a better, sharper image. But you've punched so far in that you're not losing any depth of field necessarily. The depth of field will still be, especially those longer telephotos, your depth of field is going to look so creamy at high f-stops anyway. But it's a matter of the diffraction of the light, and you might want to, so you have to stop the lens maybe down to f8 in order to get it kind of sharp enough to start seeing an image quality more similar to like f4, f5.6 without the teleconverter. And if you're shooting at f8 on 2.8 teleconverter, you're like at f16 now, equivalent. And so that gets pretty dark. I think that's kind of been my main experience with teleconverters, is I'm almost always shooting wide open whenever I have it attached, and I'm running out of light a lot faster than I want to.
Interesting. I guess there's sort of no such thing as a free lunch, in the sense that if you were to look at a high end, 800 millimeter or whatever, maybe that's probably not a good example, but even like, something like a 100 to 500 is typically going to be, pretty expensive. And so it's kind of, you can't magically attach this $400 thing to your cheaper lens and get that range. Like you're giving something up.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily teleconverters are there to solve anything for you. It's more of, like in my case, my longest telephoto is the 50 to 140, and I have the teleconverter so that I can get closer to 300 millimeters and have a nice semi-long telephoto to work with when I need it, which is rare.
Well, yeah, and so you didn't have to buy this super expensive lens, and you don't have to carry around this other big lens. Like you said, this tiny little, the teleconverter is like the size of a small prime. Right,
yeah, exactly. So it gives me the ability to have a longer lens than I purchased, while, sure, it was at the cost of like maybe half of a lens on top of the ones that I bought, but I don't have this super long telephoto that I'm going to use rarely. So I think that that's one application. The other one is for people who do want to shoot telephoto for pretty much any camera system. You're capping out in like the 800 millimeter range on some primes, maybe 600 or 700 millimeters for zooms. There's the one-off like 1200 millimeter, whatever. But most cameras are kind of capping out at that long distance.
Yeah.
And if you need more and you don't want to, and you've already spent $12,000 on your whatever to 800 millimeter Canon lens, it's like you kind of have to have the teleconverter to get that extra distance. And so I think that those are the two reasons it exists: is one, for the people who rarely shoot telephoto, and then two, for the people who always shoot telephoto.
Funny how that works. I feel like for the Canon one that I bought, mostly it was that we already had a 70 to 200 f2.8, which is a fantastic lens.
That lens is so sharp and just resolves so well. The image quality hit for putting that 1.4x teleconverter on it basically brings it in line with the other lenses.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, good, we've made it worse enough that now it doesn't look too good anymore.
And it was just that we already had that lens, and buying because the 1.4 makes it, about 100 to 300, but buying a Canon full frame lens, of that focal range would have been a much higher outlay than the $300 I spent on a used teleconverter.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it was well worth it for that use case, because it lets us punch in just a little bit more and like works really well for what we're using it for. But I don't know. I guess I was just impressed, overall with how they work, and we haven't really had any focus problems or anything with them besides the when you were doing whatever kludgy adapter thing with multiple teleconverters. But if you're using the brand's teleconverter with their lenses, it seems like it focuses fine. It sends all the aperture information to the camera just fine. I haven't seen any issues with that.
Yeah, no, I haven't either. I mean, if you're using the OEM one, usually they're fairly robust. I was looking up while you were talking the Fujinon XF 200mm f2 so I could drool on it a little bit, and they sell it with the 1.4 teleconverter on B&H. I couldn't find an option without it included.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is quite interesting.
Must be a common thing.
Because I think that it's like a $5,000 lens, and they're basically giving, it's a $5,000 lens. It's out of stock on their website, but B&H has them for $5,000, and they're just giving you the 1.4x with it for free.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
At that point, the teleconverter's a rounding error.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah.
But also, that is the exact application where you might want the teleconverter.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want that lens so bad. It's optically stabilized. It's f2. It's 200 millimeters.
$5,000.
Oh, it's so cool. It's white. It's huge. Anyways, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't have a lot of strong feelings about teleconverters. I'm happy that I have one.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it's the kind of thing where we have a little experience that we didn't have, a few years ago, and it's nice to share that, and maybe that helps somebody else.
Yeah. So maybe the main takeaway is stacking teleconverters gets weird and you run into back focus issues.
Yes, that's what people should take away from this.
Mhm.
I agree.
Yep.
Because it kind of makes you wonder, right? Like, could I just buy more teleconverters?
Maybe.
Like, could I just get like 6 of the Fuji ones and just stack them?
It's a very good question. I mean, you could have. I mean, I guess I could still do it. I could bring my Fringer adapter and my teleconverter, and I could take that 70 to 200 with the 1.4, and I could mount it to the Fringer to the teleconverter to my Fuji, and report back.
There you go. It's a good plan.
Maybe that'll work. TBD.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, cool. We're not going to get to any of these subjects, Daniel. Jeez. Okay, speaking of telephoto lenses, did you know that there's a rumor or a lens roadmap update, I can't remember which, that Fuji's going to release a 50 to 135 f2.8 XF lens?
I think it was a patent, so I don't think it was necessarily a rumor. I did see this.
What are your opinions? Would you trade 5 millimeters for a smaller, lighter, optically equivalent lens?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the patent, I don't think it's equivalent in the sense that I don't think it's an internal zoom lens, which is maybe another factor to consider.
Is the current
the 50 to 140 is an internal zoom lens.
Oh yeah, that is true.
Which is really, really nice. And you'd have to give that up.
I do like that lens a lot.
I don't.
That is such a good lens.
You know, I mean, so the 5 millimeters, I don't care about. I will say, they would have to make it optically improved in some way.
Impossible.
I don't feel like they can make it smaller and lighter enough to really be meaningful. Like it would have to be pretty small for me to feel like that was really a big benefit, because the 50 to 140 is not a huge lens. Like it's smaller than a 70 to 200 full frame. And I don't know. I think they would need to do something interesting here for me to be willing to buy it, since I already have the 50 to 140.
Fuji has been, it seems, well, I don't know if this is a totally true thing to say. It's always been really important for Fuji to make lenses that are proportional to their cameras.
Yeah.
Because the size of the cameras is one of the reasons why people buy those cameras.
I think that's true.
And they have been pushing their diameters up with recent primes, where things used to be 62 millimeter filter threads, they're now 67. But the new 16 to 55 WR LM Mark II XF lens is smaller, and they dropped the filter size down to 72. I'm really interested, or I was really interested when it came out, the Canon 70 to 200 RF lens, the first version of that. Sure, they took away the internal zoom functionality and went to an external zoom.
That lens was really small.
Right. It seemed like it was almost half the length of a standard 70-200, which was really cool. And it kind of showed, hey, this is what we can do with mirrorless now that we're moving away from EF glass. And I think that it would be very appropriate for Fuji to have a version of that telephoto that was compact, where zoomed out or zoomed in, however it's going to be, if it was the same length as the 16 to 55. That would be really cool.
That would be fantastic, because it would fit in a normal lens bag. You wouldn't have to have it sideways. You could store it vertically.
That would be enough for me to consider this over my current 50 to 140. But that 50 to 140 that I have, I pined over that for years before I bought it.
Yeah, you did.
Because I didn't want to spend the money on it, even though, like, relatively it's not that expensive. It's like on a $1,100 lens or whatever used. Even still, I love that lens. It's so good. It's hard for me to imagine wanting to upgrade, but if they made this smaller and lighter enough, I would consider it. Though I would be very upset about losing 5 millimeters.
Yeah, I don't think that matters all that much, but you're right. If they made it small enough to where it could pack down as small as a normal non-telephoto lens, that would be worth it. So maybe.
This doesn't really matter for you because you're going to switch to L mount. You don't even care anymore.
True.
Okay, this dovetails nicely kind of into something that I kind of want to talk about. So I have bought that new lens, and I've been making some edits and messing with photos off of it in Lightroom. And I was messing with a new preset that one of our clients was like, you have to use this preset. And I was like, cool. And so I brought it into Lightroom and I was messing with editing photos with it. And the preset, which I should probably tell you offline, doesn't include camera, what's it called? Lens, what is the word for it in Lightroom? Lens correction.
Oh, okay.
The lens correction automatically turns off when you apply that filter. So you need to...
Good to know.
You need to turn on lens correction with the filter applied and then create a new version of it.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
So, but also, hey, maybe that's a pro tip for people, since we're just talking about that publicly now. If you have cool filters, be careful because they may turn off your lens correction, which really matters in Lightroom because like for this new 16 to 55, the distortion and the vignetting on the wide end and on the tight end, both at 55 and at 16, are fairly extreme. At 55 millimeters, it's a little shocking how much pincushion distortion and vignetting there is.
I feel like there have been some other lenses we've talked about on this podcast where the lens came out and it was magically a lot smaller and lighter than the previous ones. And it has seemed like that's the trade-off that gets made, is that the actual like physical optical image you get out of that lens has all these problems, and they've just been able to correct them. So whether it's the in-camera processing for the JPEGs or, using the RAW in Lightroom and having the Lightroom corrections, you can correct for those things. But I remember us talking about this where it's like the software is sort of like filling the gap and making up for physics limitations. And yeah, it feels like that has gone farther and farther.
One of those lenses specifically was the Canon 35mm f1.4 hybrid lens.
That does sound right. Mm-hmm.
Which is for both video and photo. And that was one of my complaints was you're going to have to figure out a way to apply the lens correction profile in your color editing workflow for video. Right. Well, actually, it probably just can do it in camera unless you're shooting in RAW.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, is does the camera processing do it? And I assume it would.
Yeah, the camera would just do it, and then in RAW, it would. If you did shot in RAW, then you have a problem, and you have to apply it somehow in RAW. But if you had a RAW workflow and you're using a lens like this, that's not a nice, fancy cinema lens, you're going to have to deal with the lens correction profiles for a modern lens because they've become so extreme.
Yeah.
I get that because we're using digital cameras and you can rely on the JPEG processing in camera and you can rely on lens correction profiles in your Lightroom. I was going to say NLE, but I don't think that's what you call editing software for photos.
Photo editor maybe.
Yeah, your photo editing tool. You can rely on those lens correction profiles to be there, and they work really, really well to correct the images however they need to. But to me, I wonder how far that trade-off really should go.
Yeah.
Because it used to be, especially with all these vintage lenses and all the character and that sort of stuff, the good lenses were the image that you got straight off the bat, and you just had to make the lens as good as possible. And nowadays, we just see camera manufacturers either making the lens as small as possible and relying on software to fix it, or they make the lens bigger than it has to be so they can use the center of the lens and not worry about the edges being perfect.
Kind of cheating a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. And I get that those are those are two very reasonable things to do. And I don't necessarily fault the camera manufacturers for doing it, but I do wonder like how far does this go? Because I get a little stuck on, as a photographer, what's a photo, right? you talk about, you take a picture with your phone and it's going to image sack all these images and it's going to make a picture and what was the actual picture and blah, blah, blah. And sure, we can do a lot of editing and adjustments and stuff in our photo editing software and make the photos whatever we want. But I don't know. It just kind of, there's a point where it seems, if you want the purest version of the image, you almost just want it just straight off the glass with no correction. And it's frustrating that if you buy the coolest, fanciest, newest modern version of a lens, looking at it without correction makes that lens just look worse than the equivalent lens from 20 years ago.
I think what's also interesting about it is that you're losing data somewhere. Like when you do these lens corrections, if it's pin cushioning or something, then sure, you can kind of transform the image to fix those things. But at some point, it gets extreme enough that the camera didn't get the data, and the lens correction is having to compensate for something, and that's, you would think at some point that's worse than what you would get if you just got a clean image off of a like bigger lens or whatever you needed to do.
I mean, I don't know how much different that like lens correction software and like the lens correction function is, how different that is from demosaicing.
That's kind of what I was going to say, though, is that I do think that like I think that what I just said is true. I think that you're losing some quality, but then I do wonder if the quality you're losing there is insignificant compared to the quality or like the assumptions the camera is making through things like demosaicing. And it kind of comes back to well, what is a photo? The problem is anything in a digital camera is going through tons of conversions before you ever actually get to look at it on a screen.
I'm okay with camera manufacturers, I won't say taking shortcuts, but being able to make different decisions whenever they are weighing the pros and cons of all the decisions you have to make when you make a lens. I'm okay with them, making some trade-offs to make the lens smaller, to make it lighter, to make it sharper in certain ways. And they're like, well, we can't make it that sharp across the edges, but without getting this distortion, well, we can fix that in post and all this stuff. I'm mostly okay with all of that. And mirrorless lenses, we're not really adapting anymore like we used to because the flange distances are so short. So you're almost always going to be using this lens on this camera system because they were made to go together. And you can't really adapt them from one thing to another unless you're using that really super tiny, slim E-mount to XF mount adapter that someone somehow made.
Yep.
But you basically can't use the lens, like you're not going to use these lenses on either camera, but you can't because you're not going to be able to bring that correction profile over. And I think maybe something's lost there, in that it's not like they're lying to us and saying, look at this like super fancy, $3,000 lens. It has the best image quality in a lens that we've ever made, but with an asterisk like, oh, except you have to apply this image correction profile because it's going to be so vignetted and distorted that it's actually unusable.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody really, you see it in reviews, but I don't think anybody in marketing ever talks about that. I mean, why would they bring up a shortcoming? But it's kind of like the lens correction profiles have kind of become an accepted part of basically any new lens.
I guess I'm not really mad or anything. I think it's all fine. I just wanted to bring it up and I wanted to talk about it because I felt a little kind of, I don't know, yucky about it. I got this really super cool.
Your lens isn't as good as you thought it was?
Yeah, I'm really pumped about the lens. It focuses so fast. It's sharp. It's a great lens so far. Been very, very happy with it. But I was a little annoyed that, it doesn't look as good as the 17 to 70 without the lens correction profile applied.
Can't believe you said that out loud.
I know. Because, that one pin cushioned not nearly as bad. Yeah. It didn't vignette nearly as bad.
Interesting.
And I don't know. It makes it seem like, is that just because they were making a trade-off or because they didn't make the lens as good as they could have?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it's because they wanted to make it lighter and smaller. And that's something that I think is really compelling about that 16 to 55, because I didn't ever want to get the original 16 to 55 because it was a pretty heavy lens and pretty large. And so for somebody like me, I think those benefits were pretty meaningful. But I hear what you're saying. Eventually you're doing so much correction, it just starts to feel like you're doing computational photography instead of taking a real photo.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know. I expect we're just going to keep seeing more of that. I don't think it's going to
it's just going to get worse. I don't think it's going to trend back the other way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe Pentax will do it truly. Maybe they'll ship that K1 or K3 camera that is both a film camera and not a film camera, and their lenses are just going to have to be film quality.
There you go.
That's the only way you're going to get a true image, Daniel, is if you shoot on film.
Oh my gosh. Of course. This does make me wonder if the other L-mount cameras get the lens corrections for L-mount stuff, or how that works. Like if Panasonic makes a lens that's L-mount that requires corrections, what happens when you use that on a Blackmagic camera?
I have no idea.
And with Blackmagic, it's shooting RAW. So, hopefully there's some way to apply that.
I would expect that you can download it from the manufacturer in some way and then apply it in your NLE.
Yeah, apply like a Resolve or something.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure that's totally manageable. I think that, with electronic contacts on lenses, that's probably just part of the standard is the lens is going to tell the camera what it is. And then ideally it can pass along whatever that lens correction profile is supposed to be.
Yeah, hopefully that's how that works. That would make sense.
Yeah, or it tells it what the lens is and then your editing software will grab the right profile for the lens because it's like built in or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's cool if it all works that way. Like that's, I know sometimes when new cameras come out, people have trouble reviewing them because Lightroom hasn't updated yet to support that new camera. And so, some of that stuff, it's, that's an advantage, I guess, to using like well-known software to get those updates automatically and stuff.
For sure. Okay, Dana, do we have time for one more thing?
I think we do.
Okay, so we'll talk about this like one last thing, even though I really wanted to talk to you about Lightroom and XMP files and my iPad.
I think that'll be next
week. That's at least a 25-minute conversation.
Yeah.
Minimum.
Yep. We don't have time for that. We only have time for a very small topic.
Geez, but we spent like all that time talking about all those lenses for your camera.
I know. And who dragged that segment out? Who had all those lenses to talk about?
You. Okay. So in the subject of Fuji lenses and lenses that need painful camera corrections, Viltrox is bringing their body cap f4 lens.
I think it's at 4.5.
Yes, it is a 28 millimeter f4.5. I called it a body cap lens, and maybe it's a pancake lens.
I think body cap is a better fit because this is probably the smallest lens I've ever seen.
But they have it for E mount, and they're bringing it to XF mount, which is cool. I've been really happy with what Viltrox has been bringing to XF lately. It seemed like they had a few things like the 85 millimeter 1.8 and this, that, and the other, but the red badged 75 1.2 and 13 millimeter 1.4 are incredible. Basically as good as first party lenses.
Absolutely.
And they're just solidly built. And so whenever Viltrox comes out with lenses for Fuji, I'm almost kind of perking up my ear. This one seems interesting. I don't want to call it a body cap lens because that has the connotation of someone took a body cap and then took a disposable camera plastic lens, taped the two together and stuck it on the camera.
It's not that janky, but it's pretty dang small.
It has autofocus. It is 4.5 constant aperture. You can't change the aperture. And it is the tiniest lens that you can buy probably for either of these systems.
It's cheap
it is
too.
So stinking small. And it's $100.
Yeah. I feel like because it's $100, it's getting into impulse buy territory.
It has all the characteristics of like a lens that you would buy for fun. It doesn't. It has some ghosting issues. It is not very sharp in the corners. It doesn't compare to the 27 millimeter 2.8 at all. Yeah. It's definitely like way worse.
Which the 27 2.8 was it's probably 2 or 3 times as thick as this lens, even though it's a pancake lens. But it's also $400, and you also can't find it.
Yeah, all of that's true. Whereas this one, so Omar had a really good video on it on YouTube, and I watched that, and I've kind of looked around at it, and it seems nice. I don't think I would necessarily buy it because I kind of like my other lenses a little more, but I think this is a kind of a really cool Baccarat lens. It's 4.5, so it's not super fast, but because it's constant aperture, you're probably going to find yourself just that not being a problem really at all.
If I still had the XT30 and was going to keep that, I probably would have considered this lens just for, I want maximum portability. I don't care that much about the image quality. I just want to have a camera with me. I think if you have something like an XM5, this would be a perfect lens to have. Oh,
I would absolutely stick this on an XM5. That would be adorable and super tiny and kind of perfect.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned that this lens has it doesn't have a lens cap.
Oh, that's the other thing. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, it has a little switch on there. And you just kind of pull the switch and it covers up the lens or uncovers the lens.
I thought that was a really clever idea because that's kind of a problem with stuff like walk around lenses. You don't want to just leave the cap off all the time because then you're getting, dust and stuff in there. But then you take the cap off and it's like, now I'm responsible for this cap. What do I do with that? What if the cap falls off and I don't notice? All of those things can happen.
All those things. So I think it's a very fun lens, and I really love that they brought it to Fuji. It's not the best lens in any way, but I think that if you're taking pictures for fun, you're going to get some really fun pictures out of it. And like you said, this on an XM5 would be kind of perfect.
Yeah. It just feels like, kind of going back to the, all the lens corrections and stuff, looking at that idea and thinking about lenses like this. I like having variety in lenses, and I think it's cool that Viltrox did this, and it's cool if brands can use stuff like lens corrections to let them make stuff that's, gives you trade-offs we didn't have before, whether it's really small, really lightweight, whatever they're doing. And it's like, I want to have those choices as a consumer. I want to be able to buy a really high quality lens that may be big and heavy, maybe it costs $5,000, whatever. Like, I want to have that option, but I also want to have the option of getting some like weird little lens that makes different trade-offs where it's really small and I give up something in image quality, but it's really tiny. And I don't know, I'd just like to see more creativity in lenses rather than like, here's another 50 millimeter, like give us weird stuff. I think it's cool.
For sure. I would tend to agree with that. I mean, it sounds like you would be the perfect customer for a lens baby.
Yeah.
Just get some of those bad boys.
Yeah. I mean, I know stuff like that exists and you can maybe go too far with it, but
have you ever considered a tilt shift?
No, not my thing. I do think the pictures are cool, but not my thing.
I think that something like this where the lens isn't that good of quality, I don't even know if it has correction profiles for it. I'm fine with that for something like this that is for fun. I guess where the lens correction profiles things start to bug me is whenever we're talking about pro lenses.
Yeah.
And whenever we're talking about,
that's fair.
Here's a $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 lens that is supposed to be this premium, super premium lens, brand new from a manufacturer. And it is like, it vignettes 50% of the image whenever, if you shoot it without a lens correction profile. You're like, this is not good. It's just not good.
You're like, I paid all this money for your lens correction software.
Yeah, if I wanted a lens that vignetted half the image and like distorted all the edges and all this sort of thing, I would just buy like a used film lens and adapt it to my camera.
You would probably do that anyway.
That's true.
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us, and if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter @CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.